I remember the first day of class, and there's 32 of us. Yeah, let me just set this up for you once, because if you haven't studied there, it's so mind-boggling. It's like I just died and went to another planet. I walked into the program. Took me a long. They didn't want to let me in because they kept saying you can't do this. Well, why not? Because you're a Christian. Well, so is that a moral thing? No, you just don't know anything. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Did you see these degrees? Yes, but you can't do this. You can't. You don't understand what you're asking. So I walked into class the first day, sat down. There were 32 of us. 31 had black kippah, peyot, tzitziot. One was in Dockers and a polo shirt. I won't tell you which one I was. Within 15 minutes, I realized that 31 of them knew the Old Testament by memory. And I don't mean they could just say, okay, let me recite Isaiah. I mean you give them a sentence, they'll tell you the sentence before without you even telling them what book it comes from. And in more than one language, most of them. Most of them for sure in Hebrew and English, some in Yiddish. Then the class began. It absolutely blew my mind because I'm sitting there in the back thinking, you know what, I can't do this. I don't know anything. I understood what they were trying to tell me. You Christians know nothing. And that sounds terrible put down, but how many of you could recite 12 verses? When you sit with somebody who can recite 39 books, you don't feel like you know very much. So the rabbi came in, Leo Landman was his name, and he said, we went to the whole introductory thing, but then he began the class with two announcements. First he said, he stood in front of class, and everybody's sitting there. They knew what to expect. I didn't. He turned to somebody and said, recite Genesis. I'm going, recite Genesis? You got to be out of your mind. What do you mean recite Genesis? I'm thinking this is a joke. So the guy started in Hebrew. In the beginning, God, stop! Recite Genesis. In the beginning, God, stop! Did that 7 times. And then he looked at us and he said, and if you don't believe that, there's the door. Because the rest of the book isn't going to make any sense. Faith is commitment, not knowledge, first. The Bible does not start out, here are the 17 proofs that God exists. The Bible starts out, in the beginning God. What do you think, yes or no? No? Then the rest of it is going to be interesting, but will not say a word. Yes? You may not fit. You get my point. Then his second announcement just stunned me equally, but from a different view. He said, and one last thing, any of you that are here to get a degree, may I remind you that rectal thermometers have degrees, and you know what we do with those. We are not here for a degree. We are here to become men of God. And if you're here for the degree, there's the door. Now imagine, anyway, the community says this person knows the Torah, is a master teacher, we will sit at his feet. And it's osmosis, no votes, just time. They were limited. They could only teach what the community believed to be the right thing. Now that wasn't very limiting, to be honest, like it is in our theological system, but they had to teach based on what the community believed was the correct interpretation. They could come up with new parables, new illustrations, but they could not come up with brand new teaching. A Torah teacher teaches like this. It is written. That means, according to Rabbi Akiva, who said, so the text, the application, and the authority of others. I'm a Torah teacher. I belong to a denomination. I promised when I became ordained in that denomination that if I disagree with the denomination, I would do one of 2 things, one of 3 things. I wouldn't teach it. If I believed it, I would try and change it. If I couldn't change it and it still bothered me, that I would leave the denomination. So I'm limited. I cannot teach contrary to our theology. I can come up with new ways. Does that make sense? Most of the rabbis of Jesus' day are Torah teachers. The second group are what we call rabbis with smicha. Say smicha. Smicha. Okay? There were not many of these. We know of about a dozen by name in the 100-year period in which Jesus lived right in the middle. So take 30 years, 35 years on each side of Jesus, and we know about a dozen. There must have been some more, but they're not real common. What's a smichad rabbi? A, They're masters of Tanakh. Say Tanakh. Tanakh. Do you know Tanakh? The Jews used the word Tanakh for the Old Testament. If you're having a conversation with an Orthodox Jew and you say Old Testament, you just lost. You've lost your edge. You can't, because you've just told them you have the updated version and theirs is outdated and no longer as good as yours. Argument closed. What you say to a Jew is Tanakh. Why? Because they say the Bible is made up of 3 parts. Torah, Nava'im, and Chetuvim. Torah, Nava'im, Chetuvim. You recognize Torah? Nava'im means the history books and the prophets. Chetuvim means the writings. Im. Navi'im. So they took the first letters, Ta, Na, K, and you have Tanakh, the 3 parts of the Bible. Just to show you that this is relevant to Jesus' day, in Jesus' day the rabbis believed when the Messiah came, all 3 parts of the Bible would attest that he's the Messiah. There would be a passage from Torah, from Nava'im, from Chetuvim. Go with me. Transfiguration. Jesus is on the mountain. Elijah and Moses. You there? You aren't Jewish. A voice from heaven says, "This is my son, whom I love," or in one version, Luke, "whom I've chosen." And last, listen to him. Very good. Where does the phrase, "This is my son," come from? You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Where does the phrase, "whom I've chosen" or "whom I love" come from? Oop, I put this in the wrong place. Where does "whom I love" and "whom I've chosen"? And listen to him. Well, that one you'll get. Deuteronomy 18. I will raise up a prophet like Moses. Listen to him. Now notice what God did. When God wanted to attest that Jesus is the Messiah, he quotes his own book. Once from Torah, once from Nava'im, once from Chetuvim. People say, how did the disciples know at that moment that he was Messiah? And we think, well, it was the tabernacle, and it was Moses and Elijah, and it was Jesus being transfigured. People, that had happened to Jewish characters before. The thing that convinced them is the text. So he's a master of Tanakh. He's a master teacher, like the Torah teachers, maybe better, probably better. He's recognized by the community. Most of them were healers, did miracles. And I put the question mark just because there are some, it doesn't say whether they were or were not, so I don't think we can say definitively that they all did. And they received smicha. Because of these unique set of skills, they were given smicha, which allowed them to teach new interpretations. Now, what is smicha? Smicha today means ordination, but they didn't have ordination back then because there was only the priesthood, and that is in the temple. Smicha means authority. So the idea was, you have authority not only to teach what we already believe, but to teach new teachings. They weren't all new, but you could come with new teachings. Now, a smichad rabbi teaches like this. If he's going to teach a new teaching, you've heard it said, but I say to you, new teaching. Does that sound like? Obviously. Listen to the last verse of Matthew 7. And they were amazed at his teaching, for he taught them as one who had smicha, and not as their Torah teachers. So Jesus is recognized in their world as one of these specially gifted rabbis called a rabbi with smicha. you will notice many times in the New Testament, people came to Jesus and said, where did you get the authority to say this?